The sky was already breaking apart when she realized no one else was coming. The storm didn't roll in, it attacked, swallowing the horizon in a wall of violent gray, lightning tearing open the clouds like wounds that refused to close. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed in chaotic harmony, red lights flashing like a heartbeat on the edge of stopping. 200 souls sat behind her, unaware that the thin line between life and catastrophe rested in the trembling steadiness of her hands. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage of ordinary people doing the impossible, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like this deserve to travel far. Her name was Captain Alara Vance, though very few knew her beyond the calm voice that once welcomed passengers aboard Flight 702. Years of training had carved discipline into her bones, but nothing, no simulator, no textbook, no mentor, had prepared her for the moment when the aircraft shuddered violently, engines stalling one after another like fading stars. The first failure came with a sound she would never forget, a deep, hollow roar that turned into silence too quickly. Then the second engine followed, leaving the aircraft gliding helplessly above an ocean that looked more like a battlefield than water. The instruments flickered, navigation systems scrambled, and communication channels filled with static. It wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was as if the entire world had decided to abandon her at once. Fear arrived quietly at first, slipping into the corners of her mind. Not fear for herself, she had made peace with that long ago, but fear for the child in seat 14A clutching a stuffed animal, for the elderly couple holding hands in the rear cabin, for the young man flying home to propose, unaware that his future hung in the balance. 200 stories, 200 lives, all tied to her decisions in the next few minutes. Her co-pilot tried to mask his panic, but she could see it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt, the silent question of whether this was the end. But Alara didn't allow doubt to grow. She had learned, through years of quiet resilience, that panic was a luxury leaders could not afford. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, grounded, as if the world outside wasn't unraveling. She began to work. Every movement was deliberate. She adjusted controls manually, fought against the violent winds, calculated glide paths in her head as systems failed one by one. The aircraft dropped altitude faster than she liked, the ocean rising to meet them with terrifying certainty. She searched for options, but there were none, not a single runway within reach, no safe landing zone, no miracle waiting on the horizon. Except one. A faint signal appeared on the edge of her radar, an abandoned airstrip, long since forgotten, barely marked on modern maps. It wasn't designed for aircraft like hers, not even close. The runway was too short, the terrain unpredictable, and the storm made visibility almost non-existent. Attempting to land there was madness. But it was the only chance they had. As the aircraft descended, turbulence threw them like a toy in a storm. Oxygen masks deployed, screams echoed through the cabin, and time itself seemed to stretch into something unbearable. Alara tightened her grip, her mind narrowing to a single, unbreakable focus. She would not let them die. The final approach was chaos. Rain slammed against the windshield, reducing the world to a blur of gray. The runway appeared only in flashes, illuminated by lightning that struck too close for comfort. The aircraft was too fast, too heavy, too unstable, but she pushed forward anyway. At the last second, something shifted. Not in the aircraft, but in her. Every doubt, every fear, every memory of failure melted away, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like instinct. She adjusted the angle, compensated for the wind, and committed fully to the landing. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed against asphalt, the aircraft skidding violently, bouncing once, twice, before finally settling into a grinding halt that seemed to last forever. When it stopped, there was silence. Not the silence of death. The silence of survival. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, slowly, realization spread through the cabin like light breaking through darkness. They were alive, all 200 of them. But the story didn't end there. Because survival had come with a cost. The storm hadn't passed, it had only grown stronger. Floodwaters began to rise around the airstrip, debris crashing against the aircraft, wind threatening to tear it apart. They were safe for now, but not for long. Rescue teams were too far, communications unreliable, and time was running out. Alara knew what she had to do. There was one channel left, one possibility she had never imagined using outside of training exercises. A military emergency frequency. It was restricted, reserved for situations beyond ordinary crisis. Calling it would mean stepping into a world she had no authority over. But authority didn't matter anymore. Lives did. Her hands hesitated for the first time as she reached for the switch. Not out of fear, but out of the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just a call for help, it was a declaration that the situation had surpassed all limits. She activated the channel. Her voice, though calm, carried something deeper, urgency wrapped in quiet strength. She gave her coordinates, described the situation, and then, almost instinctively, she did something unexpected. She didn't identify herself by name. She used her call sign. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. A name tied to a past she had tried to leave behind. A name that belonged to a version of her forged in moments just as impossible as this one. The transmission ended. Silence followed. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. Doubt began to creep in again, not about what she had done, but whether it would be enough. And then, a sound. Distant at first, barely noticeable beneath the roar of the storm. But it grew stronger, cutting through the chaos with unmistakable force. A thunder that didn't belong to the sky. The passengers heard it too. Heads turned, eyes searching, hearts holding onto something fragile but powerful, hope. Out of the storm, like shadows given form, they appeared. 2 F-22 fighter jets. They moved with precision, slicing through the clouds, their presence both terrifying and reassuring. They circled once, assessing the situation, then lowered altitude in a maneuver so controlled it felt almost unreal. Help had arrived, but not just any help. They had answered her, not the captain of a civilian flight, but the call sign. The truth of her past began to surface in that moment, not in words, but in the way the jets positioned themselves, in the silent acknowledgement that passed between professionals who understood what it meant to carry responsibility when everything was at stake. She had been one of them once. And they had not forgotten. Rescue operations moved swiftly after that. Coordination was seamless, almost instinctive, as if they were all part of the same system. Passengers were evacuated, injuries treated, and within hours, what had seemed like an impossible situation transformed into a story of survival. But for Alara, the real moment came later. When the storm had passed, when the chaos had settled, and when she finally stepped away from the aircraft that had nearly become a grave for 200 people. She stood alone for a while, looking at the horizon now calm and unbroken. The weight of everything she had done began to settle, not as a burden, but as something else. A quiet understanding, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act when fear is all you have. That strength isn't loud or dramatic. It's steady, persistent, and often invisible until the moment it's needed most. And that sometimes, the past you try to leave behind is the very thing that saves you, and others, when it matters most. Before the ending, take a moment to write something meaningful in the comments, maybe a message of hope, a prayer, or simply the word, alive, to honor the miracle of survival. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, don't scroll away silently, like, share, and comment to let this story reach someone who might need it today. Because somewhere out there, someone is fighting their own storm, and they might just need to hear that survival is possible.